It's starting. Yeah. We tested just before. It is there. Trust me. It worked before. It's not this one. This one is signal's there. He should talk. Oh, can you say something?
Yep.
Oh,
Yes, hello.
Okay.
It's good. Hooray. Well, you already saw my title slide. You could tell that I'm giving my presentation remotely, even though I prefer to be there in person. But because of the U.S. government shutdown, I'm not allowed to travel. So I bring you greetings from the UTC -5 time zone, and I want to spend a few minutes telling you about the National Science Foundation of the U.S. and its support for programming languages in particular, programming language research in particular. So my name is Rance Cleveland. I think a number of you probably know me already. For those who don't, I'm a professor at the University of Maryland in the United States, where I've done research in formal methods and semantics of concurrency and model checking throughout my career, with a more recent interest in cyber physical systems. So I'm also, at the moment, since July, on loan from the University of Maryland to serve as a division director at the National Science Foundation. And my division covers, among other things, programming languages, software engineering, formal methods, and other topics. So in my remarks, I'll tell you briefly about the National Science Foundation and how it's structured and how the programming languages and software engineering topics are supported. And I'll close my remarks with a couple of new directions that we are thinking about supporting more explicitly in the programming languages, software engineering, and formal methods arena. So, as many of you probably already know, the National Science Foundation is the premier non-medical basic science research organization in the U.S. federal government. The foundation is a funding agency. It doesn't have its own labs, but rather it gives out money to researchers, typically at universities, for supporting their research programs. The overall budget of the National Science Foundation is approximately $8 billion a year. That's billion with a B, so 10 to the ninth, 8 times 10 to the ninth dollars. And this budget is further broken up into a number of different scientific disciplines, one of which is computer science. So the computer science budget is about $1 billion per year. And as such, the NSF is the single largest contributor in the federal government to basic computer science research by far. About 80% of the support for basic computer science research from the U.S. federal government comes from the National Science Foundation. So what happens to this $1 billion that comes into computer science every year? Well, the Computer Science Directorate, as it's called, is further broken down into divisions. And so I'm in charge of one of these divisions, which is called the Computing and Communication Foundations divisions. So we cover more theoretical topics. So in addition to programming languages, software engineering, and formal methods, we also cover things like algorithms and computational complexity, information theory, and emerging computing paradigms such as quantum computing. So our division's budget is about $200 million per year. From this $200 million, we fund about 400 new projects every year from about 1,800 proposals that are submitted. So 1,800 proposals arrive. We fund about 400 of them, so a little bit over 20%, and that's how the $200 million gets spent. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit more about programming languages and software engineering research in particular. These are the single biggest topics within our division, I would say. I don't have numbers to tell you about because since the government is shut down, the people who would give me those numbers are not working right now. So while I'm working, the others aren't. Nevertheless, I did want to point out, and this is, I hope, this is primarily of interest to the people who get funding from the NSF, although maybe it's also of sort of intellectual interest to others. The kinds of programs that my division runs there are two kinds. They're so-called core programs. So every year we send out an announcement saying, if you have interesting research you want to propose in programming languages, software engineering, algorithms, complexity, here's a deadline to submit your proposals by. And that's about 60% of our budget that's distributed to these so-called core programs. So it's a blanket call for all topics in these foundational areas. The remaining 40% is spent on more targeted programs that cover specific topics, such as cybersecurity, cyber physical systems, and the like. These are sometimes called cross-cutting programs because multiple divisions within computer science or even in other directorates like engineering will contribute funds for these programs. I will say, for those of you who do have NSF funding, if you're familiar with names like Aditya Banerjee and Nina Amla and Saul Greenspan, these are the program directors who actually administer the grant selection process, and those are people that you would interact with closely. I'm these people's boss in some sense. So what I would like to do to finish up, because I know it's the end of the day, everybody's ready for a nice beverage on the terrace, assuming the weather's cooperating. Let me tell you a little bit about some topics that are emerging that we're studying as potential sources for future special topics programs. So there's no guarantee these will become special programs, but it's things that we've begun discussing. So the National Science Foundation as a whole is in the middle of what's called a Big Ideas Initiative. So there are a number of, there are half a dozen topics that are deemed worthy of trans agency support, meaning that all the directorates, computer science, math, physics, and so on, are supposed to collaborate on these funding awards and these big topics. Two of the big topics are of special interest to computer science. One is called Quantum Leap, which has to do with all things quantum, including quantum computing and quantum materials. And the second is called Harnessing the Data Revolution, which has to do with data science, machine learning, and the like. So in line with so these topics, in addition to having support at the very top level of the agency, also have special pots of money behind them as well. So there's $30 million for each of the topics per year for 5 years. So $150 million total for these 6 big topics, 2 of which I'll tell you about that have special interest for the programming languages and scientific and software engineering communities. So in the Quantum Leap big topic, or big idea, I should say, of course, in addition to developing hardware, quantum computing hardware, and continuing the engineering advances needed to make those bigger and more realistic, there's also issues associated with programming these quantum computers when they actually do come online. And indeed, they're already, toy, I would say, quantum computers that people are programming now. There has been a little bit of research on programming language issues, semantics issues, program specification issues, but there's a lot more that needs to be done in the specification, in the programming of quantum computers, the specifications that the program should satisfy, and mechanisms for proving the correctness of these quantum computers. And so there's a range of foundational to more applied topics that I see as being a fertile source for programming language research moving forward. The second topic I want to mention has to do with machine learning and data science. So of course, these are topics of major importance across numerous scientific disciplines. And again, there's a question of how to program these systems effectively. I'll mention that there's a specific interesting development in the hardware side that has big implications for the programming of these systems, and that is that hardware engineers are increasingly developing accelerators. So you're familiar with like accelerators in the form of like graphics cards and whatnot, but they're developing accelerators for machine learning. And for energy efficiency reasons, these accelerators are increasingly analog. So they are not digital, they're analog, and you can save 50 to 100 times power without sacrificing speed, but you sacrifice, of course, precision a bit. So this opens up an interesting topic, one that's close to my heart in particular, which is how do we program mixed digital analog systems? So this is of specific interest in the setting of the machine learning, where using libraries that are, in effect, calls to analog subsystems will have to be incorporated into both our programming mechanisms, our semantic frameworks, and our verification and reasoning platforms. But this sort of mixed analog digital programming is also has issues, or is also tied with issues in the development of cyber-physical systems. Because, of course, what are cyber-physical systems but mixed analog digital systems? So, of course, traditionally, the programming of such systems takes place in between analog to digital, the digital to analog boundaries. I see some potential interest in expanding our notion of programming systems so that we could reason about both the analog and the digital aspects of these systems with appropriate type systems, fixed point semantic theories, and the like. So that's what I had to say. I know everybody's, you've been sitting there for a while, everybody's eager to move on. If there is, I guess there is time for a question or two if anybody wants, and maybe Fritz can help with the handling of these questions. And otherwise, I wish you a pleasant stay in Cascais. I really wish I could be there, but when the government says you can't travel, you can't travel. So thank you very much for your attention.
Is there a quick question? Rents. And yeah.
Could you elaborate on what you were referring to with the fixed point semantic systems?
I'm sorry, I can't hear very well.
Could you elaborate on what you were referring to with the fixed point semantic systems?
Right. So let me repeat the question to make sure I understand. You're wondering what I meant by these fixed point theories for analog systems. And I guess, hello? Okay.
Yes.
Let me just comment briefly on what I think the question is, and I'll and then so with respect to these fixed point theories, so to my mind, one of the big advances in the semantics of programming languages is the realization in the discrete setting that you can formulate, you can precisely capture loops and recursion using fixed points. So I think that's then built into the semantic theories, the operational semantic theories, as well as the denotational ones that define the semantics for discrete programs. The question is, what if we have programs that have analog behavior as well as discrete behavior? What do the fixed point? What are the analogs of these fixed point behavior? In particular, the discrete semantics rely on the fact that you have these sort of atomic actions in some sense, at least on the operational side. Those filter into those are sort of important for the definitions of the fixed point theories. And I would like something analogous for continuous behavior as well as discrete behavior. What that's going to look like, I don't know. I'm hoping, though, there are a lot of smart people in that room that you'll have the right answers if you think about it for a while.
Well, thank you, Rance, and thanks again for actually taking an interest on behalf of the NSF for a conference and for a community like Popple. Next year, we'll make space for the European Science Foundation, for the European Research Council, and okay, thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. Thanks again.